We'll greet those folks. Hey, you were supposed to get a carpet out so I don't roam around so much, go TED Talk kind of stuff, but I'll just free float because that's what I do. Welcome today from Facebook. Glad you guys are tuned in. Welcome to the students here. So my name is Ken Lane. I'm the owner of the Garden Center. So this is our 58th spring or summer to be open. So we opened back in 1962, and my father-in-law Harold Waters started the business back then. It wasn't this, and it wasn't in this location. The first original garden center actually was on Miller Valley Road, so just behind True Value back in there. It was there for only 1 year, and then it moved to Gail Gardner Street, which is over across from the bowling alley off of Gurley Street back on there. There's a whole bunch of office buildings, a lot of financial planners. That used to be the garden center. We outgrew that, and we were just renting that or leasing that, and then we finally moved to here and bought this property. This was an old subdivision, bought all the pieces, and then started Waters Garden Center. That was back in 1983. Back then there were no businesses. There was just the hospital back then. There wasn't even the shopping center here where Walmart is. That used to be our mall. There was none of that. So it's kind of a bold leap, but the growth was coming this way, this side of town, out Williamson Valley, that area. So. And the property was affordable. Mainly garden centers are land hogs, and you need frontage. Those are expensive properties. So you couldn't just be on 69 or some of these other bigger places. That's kind of the history of the garden center. We never dreamed we'd use all 2.5 acres. We thought, in fact, when I started back in the 90s, we only used the front half of the property. That was it. All of this was basically landscape supply, piles of dirt and rock. We store equipment, and then finally it's the town. We grow as the town grows, and so it just turned into this. Now I wish we had another couple acres. That would be great. So we've been trying to talk to neighbors, but that's just not quite working out yet. Hopefully, there's always a standing invitation. We're buying at market value. If you're selling, we'll just take it. So. Today in the gardens, today's talk is about fruits, berries. So I've got a bowl of blackberries in my refrigerator right off the vines, the canes, today, right now. There are fresh peaches on my counter right now. So the harvest is starting to happen. It's been happening. Raspberries have been picked, grapes are starting to form, so things are happening. This is when it happens. And if we can get a little bit of rain, oh, it really happens fast. I mean, the grapes will go from small to plump and juicy. And we'll go over watering and stuff. I know that's going to be an issue. We need to cover that. But mainly I want to go over the fruits, some of the berries. I'll focus more on the fruit trees that grow here, how to grow them, and then what not to grow. So we get influenced by a lot of desert stuff here. So that's that curse of the Phoenix market, pushing their product up the hill to their stores up here, and then they influence and pollute the marketplace. Some of those things should not be sold up here, so we'll cover those things. Okay, we'll do all that in about 45 minutes, and then I'll leave you about 15 minutes for questions. It's a small enough crowd, I think we might be able to interact some, take some questions. If you start to derail me too much or I lose track, I'll cut you off and go, let me just finish this, and then we'll kind of move forward. So, fruit trees, let's start with the tree piece. And there's basically all the pitted fruits, apples and pears grow up here. And we'll go over which ones in just a second. And then there's some nuts that grow here. So almonds and walnuts, those are the only two. Pecans really don't do well. If you're from the Verde Valley, or let's say you're over the hill, Iron Springs community, you're down towards Skull Valley, Kirkland, they'll grow down there. They grow at up to about 4,000 foot level, and then they stop producing fruit. They'll grow here. They're beautiful. Just they'll never produce fruit or a nut here. You got to be at the lower elevations. Almonds do great. Walnuts, like I've got this Carpathian walnut here. This is that soft shell. This is one you eat at Christmas time, that kind of stuff. This is the preferred walnut. This one will actually produce and do quite well. A big tree. I mean, it gets up 40, 50 feet. This is a shade tree. This is a big boy. It's not for a small yard, it's for a big yard. But it'll produce lots and lots of nuts in your backyard. If you're not into nuts, It's the world's messiest tree. So it just throws nuts everywhere. So, but those are the nuts. Everyone wants different varieties. Really, when you look at it, those are the only two that really produce. That being said, those are the ones that produce. All the others will grow here, they just won't produce here. Let's go over the fruits. I tell you what, I'm going to go, let's do this. I'm going to pass this around. And I wrote a fruit tree book with all the varieties that grow up here and the cross-pollination charts. You know, some plants need two to tango. Some just take one. That's all in there. So if you're really into note taking, your knuckles are going to be like hurting. I'll send you the link and you'll have the book. If you're comfortable with that, you can pass that around and that'll be in your inbox. Maybe by the time you get back home, we'll see. So, or if I get busy and overrun, it'll be tonight after we close. It just depends. It'll be today though. If you're doing fruits, start with fruit trees. Start with apples and pears. The reason being, they're the last ones to fruit, to bloom in the spring of the year. So we get them out of that frost. We are notorious for being bitter cold January through the middle of February, and then it gets nice, which is why we live here. We can still get snow, but that bitter, 9-degree cold, eat through your bones kind of cold, that's over. Now it's going to be real nice during the day, but cold at night. Well, the trees can get tricked into blooming too soon if it's too nice in spring. But our average frost date is about Mother's Day. May 8th is exactly the 100-year average. Take all the data, May 8th, it's the last frost for the Prescott area. It's May 10th in Prescott Valley. I think it's May 11th or something in Chino Valley. It's basically it's Mother's Day for all of us. I don't care where you're at. Look at Mother's Day. 100-year average, the problem with that is sometimes frost and snow and cold pushes into, like 2 years ago, it was Memorial Day. It was frosty right through the end of May. Or it could be the end of April where it's done, now it's glorious, it's beautiful. But the 100-year average, the funny thing about averages, lands on the 8th. Well, if trees get tricked into blooming in March or 1st of April, now they're exposed to freezing. So you want varieties with a lot of chill hours. That's how it's defined, chill hours. They're programmed into, they need so many nights of cold, so many hours actually of cold. And after they hit this target market, they just go, okay, that's enough, had enough, let's bloom, boom, and they just go into flower. Well, apples and pears typically have the longest or the highest chill hours, so they wake up later in spring. They bloom later, so they're out of that exposure. So this year it's a tremendous pear and apple season. It's just, there's so much fruit. It's a tremendous cherry and peach year. That's the next one to start looking at. Cherries and peaches are the next varieties. So if you're going to start with apples and pears, then go to peaches and cherries. And you're more likely to have fruit consistently year after year. Not every year, but consistently. The last one would be, here you go. Thank you. Just go right over there. Kind of work back this way. I don't know how to get that to folks on Facebook. Are you able to embed a link or something to that?
What I do is I ask people to put their email address in the comments.
Oh, very good.
And then they'll get it.
So if you want it on Facebook, what we're going to do is just type your email in real quick. We'll make sure you're on this list. We'll just add that in there, and then we'll delete it off of there from there. So that's a good idea. The last fruit trees to produce, or the least consistent, this is a feast or famine thing. You better have the canning supplies ready to go, because there's going to be so much fruit you will not be able to process it all, or you'll have none. There's only two extremes. That's apricots, nectarines. Okay? I guess plums kind of fall in there too. Plums actually produce pretty well here. So Elephant Hearts, Green Gage, Santa Rosas, they're all really good producers here. Yeah.
I have to mention, so since you're talking about plums, Terry, who's one of our top fans on Facebook,
love it,
says she has over 100 plums on her tree. Every branch is propped up and
Yeah.
she's canned 89 jars
Nice.
of plum
Way to go,
preserves
Terry.
just
And thanks
last
for being
week.
a fan. That is
What
awesome.
type is her?
Oh, what type is it? If you could type her back and just see what variety, that'd be great to share with all the other gardeners. Super. So plums do produce quite well. And in fact, what she said, they can produce so well that the branches will actually break off of the tree. They're so loaded, literally hundreds of pounds. So it sounds like she's notched a 2x4 just kind of, or something, propped with the branch, just to make sure it doesn't get damaged. Okay, thank you, Terry, for derailing my train of thought. Let me think here, go back to this. So, going back, and again, you'll go over, I'll send you a list of this. You'll have the varieties that do well. So the apricots, here's a challenge with a desert influence. So most of our garden information comes out of the U of A, Tucson. Phoenix is the largest market, so they've got the most influence. So all of our digital stuff comes out of them, and none of it applies to up here. And so you really don't want anything they say, plant this, it'll produce well. Just ignore that and go, that's not the variety. I need something else. So there's only two types of apricots, Moore Park and Chinese apricots. Those are the ones, and Mormon, which is Moore Park, it's the same thing. Those are the only apricots I would plant up here. If you're from other parts of the country, if you've got a favorite, that's great, but those are the ones that have the longest chilling hours. I think they need 700 chilling hours before they wake up and start blooming. So it pushes them into April before they start to bloom. This year, even with that, someone said their apricots got frosted. That's because there was a freeze the end of April, and it took that frost. Those crops were gone. If you had hung some lights or covered it, or there's some tricks you can do to protect some of that fruit. I'm not really going to go over that here just because it's so hot. But frost, there's things you can do to protect them. We put a freeze warning out when that event happened. We knew it was going to be bad. And I put a freeze warning to do these 3 things to protect them or you're going to lose them. And those that protected them, they probably kept some of the core alive, but the outer edges probably got frosted and they lost that fruit. Apples were not even in bloom yet. They weren't even thinking about it. They don't like the cold. They want to wait until it's a little bit warmer. So they bloomed about 2 weeks later. They started to bloom. So they were out of that risk of frost. So look for varieties that have at least minimum 600 hours, if not 700, 800. Some of the apples need 1,000, 1,100 hours of chill hours before they're programmed to bloom and fruit. You track with me on that? So when you start reading the tags out there, you'll see. The other one to watch too, with trees specifically, this is unique to trees. Trees need to be about 7 years old before they're old enough to produce fruit. So many times you go to your box, your marts, and that kind of stuff, the chains, and they're just buying for price. That's it. They don't care about any, just price. They need the price right. So they'll buy what's called a whip, where it's a younger, less mature type of tree. It will fruit in 3 or 4 years. It's just not going to fruit this year or next year. You really want to watch that. If you're into fruit trees, our customers that shop here, they're coming because they want fruit like yesterday. They don't want to wait. I mean, if I get a nickel for every time I heard, hold on, I don't want to wait I don't want to wait anymore. And so they just plant the bigger one. So you're looking for caliper age. So all of our trees, we purposely have trees that are at least 5-7 years old. They're at fruiting age or older. So something like this is apricot. That's probably 10 years old from cutting, seeding, rooting to this. It's been pruned several times. And by the end of the day, I'll shape it even more, kind of get it back, because all the summer suckers are on there. We'll show that to you in just a second. But that's probably like a 10-year-old tree. Now when it produces next year, it will be so loaded with apricots if the frost doesn't take it. You got to work with the environment stuff, but this is a variety that will produce here. Oh, this is Red Haven peach. I take that back. This is a peach about 10 years old.
There's a picture right there.
Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. I didn't see that. Dang it, I should be more aware. My wife said the same thing all the time. So look for that. So sometimes we'll get customers coming in going, I planted this thing. It's been 3 years. It hasn't produced yet. Many times it's because of the age. It hasn't matured enough to be able to produce fruit on its own. The other one would be cross-pollination. So many varieties take two to cross-pollinate each other. And on the end of our fruit tree racks, we've got actual charts there, blown up, so you can actually do some homework yourself. Or it also helps remind us, because at the end of the day, your memory's not quite as sharp as it was at the beginning of the day. So it just helps us track, make sure we don't make mistakes. So most of your pitted fruit, probably half of your pitted fruits will produce on their own. They're self-fruitful. Just takes one. They have the male and female flowers on the same plant. I don't know how they do that, but it's genius. So your apricots, all of them are self-fruitful. All of your peaches are self-fruitful. Half of your plums are self-fruitful. Some cherries are self-fruitful. Now, with that being said, they all do better with a buddy. They'll produce more and larger fruits if they've got a cross-pollinator. And the secret of the cross-pollination is it can't be the same thing. So a Fuji apple will not cross-pollinate a Fuji apple. It has to be something different. So Fuji will cross-pollinate a Honeycrisp, a Gala, a Macintosh, but it won't cross-pollinate itself. And so you need to be a different one. So sometimes if you've got a small yard, you got to be real strategic. If you put an orchard in, it just doesn't matter. It just kind of bees are going around doing their thing, and they cross-pollinate things for you. So really it's about bloom cycle. When do they bloom about the same time, and can they pollinate each other? So do a little bit of homework on that. Again, you'll have that chart, your inbox here shortly, and it's just got the charts I printed out here. You'll have it in digital form, PDF. You can put it up on anything you want. Okay, so that'll help you get it right. So watch the chilling hours. Make sure they bloom as late as you can in spring. And then watch the variety and the age. Make sure your pollination stuff. So those are things to really track with trees. With that being said, our soil is terrible here. So you're gonna have to do a little bit, I guess every time you plant here, you need to do a little bit of energy. The money and energy is not put into the tree, it's put into the hole. You gotta take your time to dig that right. And with fruit trees, I'll take this as an example. Let's just pull one here, something that's small enough. Let's pull this one. Couple things about this tree you'll notice. Well, first of all, let's go back to planting. Fruit trees do not put a taproot down. All the roots go sideways. The reason they do that is that's where all the food and nutrients is. The further down they go, that taproot just picks up more rock, caliche, there's no soil. I mean, there's no humic, any kind of organics. There's just rock and debris and silt and it's just yuck. So they're trained. In fact, most of the roots will probably be in the top foot of your garden soil in the landscape. That goes for shade trees, grapes, whatever, but especially fruit trees. So when you're digging this hole, just dig it deep. Dig it as deep as a bucket, but go wide. So give it some distance this way, then add some organics. And that's the secret to really having a strongly rooted fruit tree. If it doesn't root well, what will happen is, and water, if you don't water it well and plant it well, what will happen is it'll have a very shallow root base, and in a summer monsoon rain, or if it gets a real heavy load of fruit on it, it'll literally fall out of the ground. So these things need a tremendous root structure to keep that thing upright. If you're going to put on 500 pounds of apples on this thing, it's got to have good strong roots and a straight trunk, or it will fall over. Or a heavy wind gust, you focus up on those ridge lines. The wind can be ferocious at times. All it needs to be fully leafed, plus some fruit, have a wind gust hit it, and it'll pop right over. So you need deep roots. The secret is about roots. Anyone see a picture on this? What is this? Oh, this is my apricot. Haricot apricot. Okay? It produces really, I've grown this for myself. It does really, really well. The other thing with School of Hard Knocks, everyone wants to plant on the downhill side next to that dry wash or next to a creek or something. Don't do that. That's the worst place you can plant a fruit tree. The reason being is that cold air in spring while it's in bloom settles. So warm air rises, cold air settles. And if you're planting right next to that cold, hopefully it will stall the plant from blooming a few days, but more than likely it's going to bloom when everything else does. You're going to get a cold, it'll all settle down on the bottom hill, and it'll get frosted. So my best fruit trees have been up on the top of the hills, next to the edge of the house, by a lawn, rock lawns, grass lawns. Those things throw off heat, and they protect it or insulate it some. It'll get you a couple extra degrees. I mean, if it really goes down to cold, it's over. And 28 is the magic number. At 28 degrees, all hope is lost for fruit trees. It's going to take all the fruit. At 32, it takes about 10%. There's actually some math on it. At 31, it takes 20, but at 28, all the fruit is frozen off the tree, just permeates. Unless you cover it, protect it somehow, or plant it in the right place, then there's tricks you can do that. But if you get down into low 20s, there's nothing you can do. It's just over at that point for that year. It won't damage the tree. It'll look beautiful. It doesn't even affect it. But the flower or those immature fruits will be frosted. Okay? All right, so you'll see here another thing. You never want to start a fruit tree by seed. You want to control the genetics. And so what we do is we'll go through a field and we'll look for the perfect tree. It's got the perfect shape, perfect color. It's got bigger fruits. Some trees are just better than others. If you're starting by seed, you have no control over that. So all of our trees, you'll see, you really want to, when you're buying a fruit tree especially, you want to look for a graft. What we've done is we found the perfect tree. We took a cutting off of that, which is, we'll get an exact genetic copy of that, and then we'll graft that onto this tree. We're actually picking a rootstock that is more adapted to clay soils, because we have heavy clays. So we're taking a specific rootstock for here, and we're grafting that preferred variety, so now we get a consistent tree that's a genetic copy of that, simply by grafting. It's a technique that's been around for millennia, but you really want to look at it. But you'll see this little knot right here. And within just a couple of years, this will just grow and cover that in. It'll just be this big trunk. And you'll see a different color different texture of bark, but that's the only real way you can tell that was grafted. But look for that when you're buying trees. You want to see that so you know what you're buying and have a better variety of fruit out there. We do that for our maples. We do that for all of our trees are grafted trees. In fact, sometimes, I don't know if I've got any here, less prone. Yeah, here's an aspen tree. These just came in. I'm showing these off just because they just came in and they're so pretty. Oh my gosh. But you'll even see a graft right here. This is grafting tape. So we've taken this, that white Band-Aid. What we did is, aspens are known to just whip right up, so you'll have this, get off of me, there we go. Aspens are notorious for being tall and spindly. Well, you don't want to plant that in your yard in the mountains, where the wind is blowing like crazy. It'll just blow it over, it'll lean over. You want a sturdier trunk. Well, that means we need to hold on to this for a year or two longer. This is probably 5 or 6 years longer. But as it grows, we'll cut off the top to keep it from suckering. So it'll put all that energy into the trunk. But now we've got this funky top, so we still want to keep the lead, so we'll graft. We'll just take a cutting off and graft it back on here so we can control the shape and the quality and the size of the trunk. We're trying to get the chubbier, fuller, higher grade aspen. So you'll see that many times, mainly on the bigger trees like not fruit trees, but like maples, sycamores, you'll see that, locusts, you'll see a Band-Aid up there. It confuses some folks. Well, that's a graft. That's just a graft for a different technique, but that's a preferred way to have a nice quality tree. It's a true art. I've tried grafting. I fail more than I succeed. So it's truly an art. These guys, because they're just really masters at it. Still, they'll still fail some, but still it makes it look good. Quaking aspen, just before I leave that, because there's two types of aspens. There's Populus tremuloides, that's the Latin name. That is trembling leaf poplar. You'll see that when the wind flows through them. The leaf will kind of dance like that. That's the local native. And then you'll see them name them sometimes like golden aspen or Dakota aspen or Duraheat. There's all kinds of names. They're all just aspens. They're just naming them so they can get a premium or patent it or whatever. There can be some width or something to it, but an aspen is an aspen. The different variety is Swiss aspen. That's the European variety. Your cousin to that, it's got more of a serrated edge. So it looks different and it doesn't tremble. It's got pretty white bark, but it looks more like a birch than it does an aspen. So the way you plant this, I mentioned 3 times the width, same depth, kind of saucer shaped. You don't want any debris that's bigger than a golf ball. You really want to screen your soil. Some of you have terrible soil. I'm just appalled. You poor folks in the Prescott Lakes area. I don't know how you garden out there. We had to get the guy's a 70-pound jackhammer to go just plant out there. It's so hard. So you really want to plant, excrete that soil to get that debris out of there. So old roots, those are bad. They rot and compost and taint the soil. So screen all that out. And you're probably going to add for this about a bag of mulch. We call it premium mulch. We make our own soils. And so we'd add about a bag of that to that native soil. We'd mix that in and then backfill around that. Do not plant in a divot, whatever you do. This is the curse of Phoenix coming up to the God's country. They should keep those planting techniques down there where why would they live 10 miles from the sun? It's ridiculous. They set a record of 118 yesterday. Get out of there, leave, come up here. Well, what they do there is they say, plant in the divots so you can rain harvest. So you get easier to water. Here, if you do that, you'll kill your plants. Because we actually have moisture, we have rain. We cool down in the evening. And so here you want to be at soil level or even a little above soil level. So if you've got real heavy clay, I mentioned Prescott Lakes out there, we would never plant this at soil level. We'd plant it with about that much of the roots sticking out of the ground. Then we slightly mound or taper the soil up to this so we can ensure that at least that much of the root can breathe in a monsoon rain. When damage happens, it's usually in March and end of August, September. That seems to be when you get root rot. So the soil has loaded up with moisture because you've been watering with your irrigation, and then we'll get some afternoon rain, couple afternoon rains that week. All of a sudden the soil stays too wet and you'll get root rot. So, or in March, we load up with these heavy snows that are gooey wet, and the soil just sits there and just slowly melts, and the roots will literally rot underneath the tree, even though it's dormant. So you want to help that soil breathe with our heavy clay soil. And that's the technique. I see too many folks making a mistake, and they'll actually bury this thing. They'll have it, here's our ground level. They'll have this thing in a slight divot so they can water it easier, so they can think that rain is good for it. It is good for it, but you just want it to breathe. It can drown it more than it can hydrate it. So it's really important, especially if you have heavy clays. Because as you get closer to Granite Mountain, the soils get more granity, looser and looser. That technique, there's more fudge factor. But that's just a recommendation for you. Again, School of Hard Knocks, I've killed many trees. So I've just learned how to do this. And then when we plant for you, we're on the hook for 2 years. It's warranted for 2 years. We don't want the thing to die. We don't want to come back. It needs to live. These are things we've learned that really help. And I think for your friends, you share your best garden advice. I think that'll work for you all too. We're windy. Oh, let me get done with that. So we backfilled, mulch, tapped it down, watered it in. There would also, at the very end, I would sprinkle some all-purpose plant food. I would take this organic food, sprinkle some of that. Again, we're trying to spate this thing so it wants to grow more roots, stronger roots. It's all about roots. This will release over the next 3 months, a little bit of food for the next 3 months. And then water it in with Root and Grow. This is a liquid. It's a liquid. It's composted tea, basically. Tea compost is like magic. It's like a syrupy, dark colored, but what it does, it activates the bacteria in the soils, It encourages the plant to want to root, so it stabilizes it. This, when you transplant this from this bucket, it's known for probably 3 or 4 years. You put it in your yard, it's not happy. It's not a good thing for it. It just wants to stay in the soil. So it's going to go into shock. And so this helps to stabilize it. What I do myself, I'll give it this, when I first plant it, usually I'll have this pre-mixed before I even start my 2-gallon watering can. And at the very last step, I'll pour this in. And I'll repeat this every couple of weeks until I see the tree stabilized. Then you'll know, because new leaves will come out. At first, it gets kind of wilty. They're real talkative. They're unhappy. You didn't quite water right. You missed one. Well, it helps it activate it. Then the buds start settling down. Then it opens up, and new leaves are forming. Oh, settled. And then I'll cut it off of all this. It doesn't need this anymore. Now your soil, your food will actually start doing all the work for you. Let's cover watering while we're at it. Maybe, Kim, we can add the planting guide too. So we cover this, and it's got the water guide on it. So we'll do both of that for this class. Watering, you're going to be really twice a week. You're going to water plants. Even in your own yard. If you got new things, water twice a week. Trees and shrubs, vines, grapes, things with a big root structure. Flowers, that's different. Tomatoes, that's different. But you get shallow roots. But things with it takes several days for that much soil to dry out. So the worst thing you can do is water this thing every day. That's the worst you can do. Because now it never gets to breathe. It's always in the water. What happens if we stick your feet in the pool for the next 2 weeks straight? What happens? Prunes right out, your skin drops right off. The exact same thing happens to a tree. When it's not skin, it's called bark. The bark literally will rot and fall right off. It'll have a black stain, a rot. Sometimes you'll have an odor. I've seen it 1,000 times. So you want to water it deeply, and then you want to take a break and let it breathe. So that's the secret to really healthy kind of plants. So this I'd water twice a week. Usually we're trying to say, give it about as much water as the bucket size. So this would probably need about 7 to 10 gallons of water per week. So maybe 3.5, 4 gallons at a time. That would be enough. If it's a 15-gallon tree, it's going to need about 15 gallons per week. So split that up, 7 gallons at a time. If it's a 5-gallon plant, guess how much water it needs? 5 gallons of water. So just look at the bucket size. That's the easiest way I can visually help you know how much to give a new tree. Next year, you just water it once a week. That's enough. Because now you've taken the roots. If you've done it well, now the roots aren't just here. Now they're all the way, they put on 2, 3, 4 feet of roots underneath the ground, and it takes the edge off. It takes the pressure off of you all. Okay, does that make sense on the watering? So your drip system, I don't know how to mathematically help you with that. Depends on the size, depends how often you're running, how long you're running the clock. But on this size tree, minimum, I'd put 2 drip emitters, minimum, maybe 3. And then I'd probably water it for an hour and a half, 2 hours at a time, to push that water through the root ball, and a little bit more if I can, because I want it to have as deep a roots as I possibly can. That's what makes a robust plant. The next tip is, fruit trees especially, oh my goodness, make sure you stake the tree, especially if you're in this windy, if you're in a backyard with a corner lot that's back there by the fence corner, maybe not, because it's protected enough, but very few of us have a truly protected area where just the wind doesn't get it to lean. What happens is we get this prevailing southwest wind, and trees will start leaning to the northeast. And so you'll go through your neighborhood, and you'll see which ones were never planted, were never staked. They're all leaning, and they're always leaning to the northeast. And so that's fine until it loads up with fruit in about 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden you put 300 pounds of peaches on, and it just goes thump and falls right over. Falls literally out of the ground. So make sure as they're young, they grow straight. Don't let them lean. Force them to grow. It's easy to correct it while it's young. The second it gets a couple of years where it's like it solidifies, and there's no way to bring that thing back. Literally, I have tied trees that were onto a bumper with a rope and tried to pull it back with a pickup truck, and it would not come back. I couldn't get enough for it. It just solidified. Like, trees are amazing how strong they are. And so just make sure they grow straight. Okay? Yeah. also brought, we make these for you. We try to make gardening easier. This is a tree stake kit. It's not very complicated. We take duct tape. We tape 2 stakes together. We put enough wire and 2 V-straps together to this $19.99. It's just an easy way to go, I want a tree stake pole. I do find for bigger trees especially, if you use a smaller than lodgepole, we're so windy, they wiggle out of the ground. They just kind of slowly work their way up. And they follow that. These are big enough, they don't come out of the ground, they stay there. The other secret I can tell you with these is you can leave them on too long. So if these have been on longer than 2 years, probably your tree is holding the stakes up at that point. Now your stakes are doing no good. So at some point you can break these right off. And probably it's just rotted in the ground, you just pop it right off. If you're not sure, what I tell folks is cut off the tie, leave the stakes there, because that's the hard part to put in the ground. We get fancy drivers, all kinds of stuff to put stakes in the ground. If you're not sure, you just want to test it, go ahead and just take this wire off, let it go through a storm, and you'll quickly know, oh, does it need the stakes a little bit longer, and then you can just tie it back up if you need to. Almost guaranteed, you'll never need to tie it back up. Just pop them right off, and then do whatever you do with stakes afterwards. Questions on how to plant? Does that make sense? That goes not just for fruit trees, that's how you plant, really. Okay? Good. Watering? Let's cover food and bugs, shall we?
One question.
Yeah.
I think it's a walnut there. You've got a bamboo stake.
Yeah.
Does that remain after you plant?
Good. Yeah, very good question. We try to take these off. This guy is growing so fast, so we left it on for this one because we wanted the top to stay true, to stay straight. Mostly we take these off. You should never leave this onto the trunk. You see it right there. You see the trunk here. You see this bamboo stake. We put this on there for shipping reasons, so we can drive them from the farm to here without damaging the bark, because we will pack the truck. It will be packed for efficiencies, for cost. And then usually we'll pull these off once they get here. So once you'll see a bunch of bamboo stakes out in the parking lot because you just had a huge huge load of maples and aspens come in. We try to pull these off so people aren't tempted to keep them on when they plant the tree. If you were to keep this on for the next year, what would happen is it's like putting your arm into a cast for 2 years. What kind of muscle retention do you have at that point? It's just limp at that point. Your trees do exactly the same thing. They never have to bend or become strong in the wind. We want them to move, and become strong, but not blow over. So that the lodge poles, we'll put one on either side of the trunk. We'll just tie once, typically, to the trunk. So it can move, but it's never allowed to lay down. We'll even do that for evergreens. Evergreens, they're notorious for, some of your fast growing, like the cypress and stuff, the cedars, they'll grow so fast they'll start leaning like a shade tree will. But mainly your spruce and pine, we stake those for the winter, late winter, early spring, with these real heavy, wet snows. So the snow builds up on this layer to the spruce, and all of a sudden you got 300 pounds of snow, and it just goes funk. So we just put the stakes on there so we don't lose those new root hairs. And usually just a year will do it, and then you can take that off. But we don't want snow in like March to load up and then it falls over. We can prop it back up, that's fine. It's not going to damage it. We just lost that year's roots forming now. So we don't want to go backwards. We always want to go forward. So good question. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Before you go on to bugs,
sure.
I have 2 things from
Great.
online.
Sure.
First of all, Melissa says she has curled up leaves on her grapevine.
Yeah.
And she wants to know if that could be from overwatering.
Great.
And will they rebound?
Gotcha. So Melissa, great question. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get this out of the way. That's actually a good question. Let's cover grapes and berries for just a moment. So I've got a grapevine right here. My grapes, this is going to be a tremendous grape year. Lots of grapes. If we get a little afternoon rain, boy, it'll really be magic. My grapes have formed 10 feet of growth already. They're not done, they're still growing. The more foliage you get, the bigger the grapes are. These things are like sugar making factories. The more leaves, they just create the photosynthesis, they form it into fruits. That's what you want. Berries the same way. So this is a blackberry. Same thing. My blackberries have formed 8-10 feet of canes. And they're producing like crazy right now. So we're harvesting the blackberries. We've just got done harvesting the raspberries. They do very, very well. Okay. Curled leaves, yes, are most likely in grapes from overwatering. It's good to stress grapes out a little bit. It forces them to think, oh my gosh, I might die. I better produce more fruits. So they focus on this reproduction thing. So they stress out. Tomatoes can be that way. You want tomatoes to get a little bit stressed. So they're focused not on growing all new vines. They're going, oh my gosh, we could be in drought. I should start forming a fruit so that I can form seed to reproduce myself. So that's how plants are thinking. They're there to do one thing, populate and grow. And so if it gets too much, sometimes you get this curly or yellowing. Sometimes you have yellow leaves. That's not from underwater, that's typically from over, typically. Could be a disease or something, but more likely it's a water issue. So again, this should be watered about once a week, maybe twice a week if it's got fruit on it. So when it's got fruit, I'll be a little more diligent or try to really watch it because they're more sensitive. If they get dry while they've got berries or grapes on it, they'll sacrifice the fruit to keep the core of the plant alive. So they'll start dropping. It's called fruit drop. Typically it happens at the end of June. Not always, but typically we call it June drop. It can happen on peaches. It can happen on blackberries and raspberries especially. They'll just shrivel up and then let them go. So watch your watering while it's got fruit on it. Once a fruit is harvested, treat it like everything else in the landscape. It doesn't matter as much. So does that help? Did we get Melissa?
Yeah. Okay, and one other question kind of relating to this. Bobby wants to know if that same advice transfers to cherry trees.
Yeah, cherries the same way.
Okay.
Cherries especially, they're real talk. Cherries are just a bunch of crybabies. They just curl and leave, and they're so talkative. But if you're a gardener, you understand them. You go, oh look, he's suffering. I'll let him dry out. Give him some more. Just kind of watch that. Your pitted fruits are a little more sensitive than apples and pears. I don't know why. Just cherries are really sensitive to overwater. We actually have some native cherries that grow wild out in the forest. They bloom white. Put a little tiny cherry on, not a big one, but they're really drought tough. So if you're going to kill a cherry, it will be from overwatering, almost always. So,
Okay, one more.
Okay.
We actually have more people online today
Oh, good.
than are here.
Hey, I'm glad you guys are tuned
So
in.
that's
Appreciate
very unusual. It's not unusual
Yeah.
for a lot of people to watch it after the class is over
Yeah.
on Facebook.
Yeah.
It's very unusual to have that many.
Sure.
So Terry got back to us about the plum.
Oh, awesome.
Okay, she said unfortunately she bought it here about 6 years ago. She doesn't remember what kind, but naturally she used that as an opportunity to ask one more question that I
Of
think
course.
people here will be interested
Okay.
in, and that is, when should she be pruning her stone crop fruit trees?
Great. I'll cover pruning after bugs.
Okay.
So, Terry, don't. You better stay behind that screen. We'll cover that. There was a question right here.
Back to watering grapes. Winter time. How much? How often?
So, good question. So, should we water things in the winter? The answer is yes, we should water things. This is hard for you Midwestern folks. Wisconsin, 8-foot frost line. Why would you live there in the winter? Get out of there. You like snowshoes, I guess, or snowmobiles or something. There's no reason to garden outside out there, but there it locks in, it freezes, and everything solidifies. It's like a big ice cube. Here we don't do that. Our frost line is maybe, I think it was like an inch this winter, and then it thawed in like a few days. We kept on planting. When it was frosty, we just pulled that up and kept planting trees. We just never stopped us. What that means is your plants will continue to use water. Not a lot of water, but they use some moisture. The sap is still flowing. You're still seeing bud growth, flower growth, flower buds, leaf bud growth. So you want to water your landscape, but especially fruiting things, or anything that blooms in the spring, lilacs, forsythia, quince, anything that blooms in the spring, You want to water those things twice per month. If we get a heavy snow, and heavy snow is like at least like 6-8 inches, not a skiff, not just, oh, isn't it pretty, it's going in the afternoon. I mean like a serious snow. You can maybe cut back on one of those. So deep water it like you would in June. We just do it once or twice a month, and that keeps it healthy. If you don't do that, we get what we call winter burn. The tops, it'll get dry. If you're growing things in containers, this is really important. So my figs I grow in containers, blueberries I grow in containers. I have a lot of containers. If a plant gets dry, gets cold, and it's dry, that's disaster. So you don't ever want a plant to be, you want it to be hydrated as we go into a cold. So when the weatherman's going, oh my gosh, it's going to be a cold one. It's coming down from the north. It's going to be so cold. It might be 33 tonight. It's cold to us. But if it gets single digits for sure, even teens, it's pretty cold. Things are starting to freeze. That's when damage happens. So this is kind of counterintuitive. Whenever I see that it's really cold, I water my plants, especially my raised beds and containers. I will go out the night or two before and just water them. If you do that, it keeps the plants have natural antifreeze in them, built in, keeps them healthy. And water is what keeps that active and fluid. If it gets dry, it just stops flowing to the tip. We get this the tips will burn off. So you'll see it in your neighborhood, every spring you'll see some plants got killed back. That is the reason, the only reason that happens. Maybe gophers, more than likely it's winter kill. So water in the winter, a couple times a month. Great questions. This is a blueberry. You can grow blueberries here. Blueberries like humidity, they like boggy soils, and they like acid. We have none of those. Okay, so you'll need to be, this is for a gardener. If you're new to gardening, I would say don't start with blueberries. Start with a blackberry. You can't, they're just guaranteed to have berries every year. Then go to raspberries, you're guaranteed. And then go to blueberries. Here I grow blueberries in my containers. The reason I do that is I can plant them in potting soil. What are we doing on time? 10 minutes? We're doing okay. I'm getting too into this now. I'm in the rhythm. Anyway, this is, I'll plant it in a pot, usually about, I don't know, 22, 24 inch. And I fill it with potting soil, or water's potting soil. The main ingredient is peat moss in that particular soil. Peat moss is extremely acidic. Keeps the plant green and lush. If you plant it right out in the yard, you can do that. It will grow and be fine. You just have to always load it up with sulfur, always trying to make the soil acidic all the time. So you'll find they naturally want to yellow on you. And so that's always a pH. The pH crept up too high. And our water is extremely alkaline, which these guys don't like. So your water coming out of the tap is probably in that 7 to 8 range, which if you look at garden books says you can't garden with that. You can. You just have to have the right varieties, and you got to be more strategic, but those plants will take it. You got to use the right food. That's why our water, only buy food from Waters Garden Center. And because we actually put sulfur in our food. Because we know what we're gardening with, we're trying to lower the pH all the time. So that's why it works so well. So especially for blueberries. Okay, we're going over bugs. Right now we are seeing bugs. We're seeing curled leaves. We're seeing holes. We're seeing all kinds. The worms are in the apples. We're seeing customers come in with that. Here's what to look for. Number one culprit right now, if you've got any fruit trees right now, especially apples and pears, you need to do this. It's important. Codling moths are the worm that gets into that particular fruit. So you see a hole, this dark tunnel in apples and pears. They're very strategic. They only like the taste of apples and pears. They're just like people. They got their favorite fruits, their favorite tastes. They stick with that. It's a little tiny moth, not that big. It's a cute little thing, but they attack the tree by the thousands. They don't attack it. They lay eggs by the thousands. And so apples, what they'll do is when they blossom in the spring, she'll lay her egg right inside the blossom, just as it's pollinating. Then it will form over and then just seal that egg up. And there's nothing you can do at that point. Once it's got fruit all the way around it, it is completely protected, which is why she did it. And so that's where you see one exit tunnel. It'll mature, it'll burrow its way out and then fly off and then relay eggs again on that same fruit or on other fruits. So they spread. So strategy-wise, as the tree, apples and pears, as they look like they pollinate, the petals start to drop. Looks like it's snowing almost. You're dropping down. Spray it right then. I don't care if you've had them in the patch, just do it. You're going to spray it with BT or Bacillus thuringiensis. This is an organic spray that takes out caterpillars. It's very strategic. It only does caterpillars. That big green worm you have on your tomatoes, they're starting to show up. Caterpillar wipes them right out. You can spray it for the day of harvest on your tomatoes. Still organic. It's a great spray for codling moth too, because it's a caterpillar, a tiny worm that eats like a maggot. It eats the fruit. Now what happens is we'll have 2 to 3 more waves or populations or matings of codling moths on your fruit trees because we have such a long growing season. So they'll come back and they'll lay more eggs and they'll lay eggs on the, you put these down. They'll lay eggs on the outside edge. Yeah, on the outside of the fruit, and now it'll hatch, burrow in, mature, and then burrow back out. That's where you have multiple exit tunnels. That particular fruit, the egg was laid on the outside. And so if we just sprayed it with the BT, you'd have a perfect fruit. The only way I can tell you when they're active, if you want to spray while they're actually laying eggs, I always put a codling moth trap up in my tree after I see little fruits forming. So about now, really I would have done it really back in May, a couple months ago, but this is a tree that you hang in your tree, and it's got a pheromone, it's got a little bait that they're attracted to, and while they're making whoopee, they're looking for a gal to kind of make it with, lay eggs with. He's attracted to that and gets stuck in there. And so it's a monitoring system. If you read stuff on the internet, it says, oh, hang a codling moth trap and it will take care of all your codling moths. That is not true. It's just a monitoring system. There's so many that attack a tree. There's no way this particular trap, this little tiny box, there's no way it can trap all those codling moths. It's there to monitor. It'll just sit there. Nothing's going on. But all of a sudden you'll go out, and a month later you'll see, oh, there's some moths in there. There's 2 or 3 moths. Where'd they come from? Oh, that's interesting. The next night you'll come out, oh, there's 10 of them in there. Then the next night you'll come out and it's like full. But oh, that's the time I know when to spray. What your grandparents did is they just put it on a calendar. They sprayed every 2 weeks. That's just, it was a religion. Okay, it's Sunday. We have to go spray the trees. What we're going to do. We're not big on that here. We'd rather monitor and not use as much spray because it's dangerous for you. It's just, even organics, you got to be common sense. This helps you target exactly when to spray your apples and your pears. 1 per tree. A box comes with 3 of them. I just covered codling moths. That's the only thing that'll take out apples and pears. Only thing you gotta watch. Pitted fruits are actually a little easier. Things don't eat their fruits, except birds. Birds, what I do with birds, I'll get a bird tape. It makes reflective tape. Birds are real spooky. So if you just scare them, something they're not used to, they'll stay away from the fruit. The secret is they get used to the scare tape. So you don't want to put it on too early. Typically about 2 weeks prior to your harvest, put these long strands of bird tape. It's very inexpensive, and it scares them away enough to where they leave the fruits on. They might peck a few of them, but they pretty much leave them alone. It really works for plums. I've got it on my peaches right now, blackberries. Just keeps them off. Just put it on, don't put it on too early, or they just get used to it. They're smart. What's that?
What was that time period?
2 weeks, about 2 weeks prior. That just works for me. You'll hear different things in the net. If you research, you'll have different things. It seems to be locally with the local birds, about every 2 weeks. Hey, Ted. The other thing you can watch is curling. That's the main thing, or bubbles coming from the bottom of the trunk. Those are the most dangerous for pitted fruits. Cherries, apricots, nectarines, plums. They all get the same thing. Curled leaves are going to be a disease, leaf disease. They get leaf curl, or they get spotting. In fact, I thought I had one. Showing something here. This is, we can maybe show a couple of these. This is called, here, I'll pass that around. That's shot hole. That's where a bacteria got into the leaf and ate the little sugar out right there, and then the leaf just dropped out. It's very, very common on purple leaf plums, any kind of your prunus family. Very, very common. Not a concern. I don't even worry about that. We call it shot hole because it looks like someone took a shotgun and went dunk. You see little holes going through it. As it matures, you'll never see that. It's just so common here that birds spread it. It's just, there's no way to really get around it. What you don't want to see is the leaves starting to curl. That's more serious. That's peach leaf curl. And there we've got a spray. It's called Revitalize. You spray it and it gets rid of that. Just gets rid of that. The one to really watch would be, let's call this one. This looks like a cherry. Let's just see. This is a Lapin cherry. I think it's self-fruitful. Puts on this beautiful, sweet cherry. We actually also do Montmorency, which is a pie cherry. Bings, Black Tartarians, Utah Giants, Stellas, cherries do really well here. What you want to watch is right at the base, usually about where the graft is, maybe a little bit above. You'll see little pinholes and a bubble of sap will come up. If you see that, this is serious, come see us right away. We've got a little tiny clear-winged wasp. It's kind of unusual, but they get into certain fruits. And she likes to lay her eggs at the base of these kind of trees. And the larva will burrow in and eat the cambium layer, or the sugar area underneath the bark. And if left unchecked, she'll girdle the tree. And so it'll actually kill the tree. So it's pretty serious, really easy to affect. If you see it, just come see us, we can knock it right out. It's not something you see every year, but it's something if you have fruits, you should walk through and monitor, probably every late spring, early summer. Kind of look for that. If you see that, we've got a spray that we just knock that bubble off, dab it on there, and it takes them right out. That's really the only insect that goes after these that's kind of common. You see pretty regularly. Yeah?
Could you post pictures of that, what to look for maybe?
I could. Just look at,
Describe it again?
yeah, it's got a bubble, it just looks like bubble gum or something. Oozing, growing out on the bark. Looks like a wart on the bark, but it's sap. What happens is you burrowed right in, and underneath that you'll see a hole in the bark, and the tree is trying to drown that particular insect with sap, and so the excess is going to be, so it's like bleeding. So it's trying to flush that wound out, and so you're seeing as the gardener that bubble of sap. If you see that, just come see us. We'll go, oh yeah, take a picture, look, bring it in. We can ID it in a heartbeat for you. We just see it so often. If in doubt too, we've got a microscope. It's kind of fun to see, an 8-eyed, sawfly coming at you. It looks scary. It is scary. But you don't see it with the naked eye, but you do underneath the microscope. It's really kind of cool. I love it. It's kind of fun. Okay, so that's pretty much the bug piece. What else was that covering? Was that it? I think we're coming down to the end.
Pruning?
Yes.
What about cicadas? How do you get rid of those?
Cicadas you don't get rid of. That's that noisy singing chorus thing. They show up every summer. Some parts of the country, they come up like every 7 or 14 years. Here they come up every year, but they don't overpower, they don't come at us, they don't overwhelm the gardens. You'll see big holes coming out of certain areas, certain gardens. They love elm trees. They love cottonwoods, willows. There's certain things they seem to migrate to. They live in the ground for up to 4 or 5 years, and then they come out and they do this. They don't live very long. They don't even have a mouth part. They're only up to do one thing, lay eggs. So you'll see, they'll lay eggs, actually, you'll see a branch like this. Let's get it where the online folks, we have so many students online, this is great. You'll see a branch like this. You'll see like someone took a knife, like a pocket knife, and just cut little pieces of the bark off. She's laying her eggs. I don't know how they get them that strong, but she just cuts that open and lays eggs up and down there. They'll hatch, drop down this summer, fall. They'll drop right to the ground, and then they'll live their entire life down the ground. They're an ugly, hideous looking, like 3-4 inch fluorescent green. It's a kind of a pretty bug with bulbous eyes. Looks like it's come from Mars, it's sucking your jugular vein. They're very innocent. They don't bother. We really don't spray for them or try to affect them because they just don't do any damage. Sometimes they can kill off that branch just because they've laid so many eggs. But one branch on a big cottonwood tree, we don't worry about it. Okay. They can be a little nuisance, especially if you're selling trees. And they all start singing at once. You can hardly hear yourself. You got a mask on, you can hardly talk loud enough over the cicadas. So just kind of something we do. It's something unique. We kind of have a pretty song. We all like to sing together. Yeah.
This isn't about bugs, but
So,
I have field fencing,
yep.
and I would like to grow something
Yeah.
to block neighbors
Yep.
and eat.
Sure. Easy. So what I do, just to reiterate in the back and online, she's got field fence. She wants to grow things on it, but also have some privacy. What I did with mine, I've got a half-acre lot up above the high school, up by Prescott Lakes, that area, and big yards. So I've got a 6-foot cedar fence to keep the dogs in, so I don't want them getting through, but I want privacy too. We've got a beautiful, entertaining backyard, patios that are as big as the house, bigger, hot tubs, fire pits. I mean, it's just built a barbecue. We love spending time with it. You don't want your neighbors looking in at you. So what I did is I took every 8 feet, I planted a edible thing. I go grapes every 16 feet. In between those, I plant a berry of some sort. So I got a grape, a berry, grape, a berry, grape, a berry, because it looks pretty. They grow up to the 6 feet and they grow a little beyond. So right now they're up this tall, this wide, and they're producing like crazy. The upper half of the property I harvest for myself. The lower half, I love birds, and I love weed track. There's so many birds, it's ridiculous. We leave the bottom half for the birds. We just let the fruit go. I don't let them drop on the ground because I don't like rats, but I do like birds, so as long as it's up on the ground. But usually rats aren't after berries and grapes as much as they are peaches, bigger fruits on the ground. That's what attracts the field stuff. But that's what I do.
Okay.
In Prescott Valley, had a very small yard. Our first house was in Prescott Valley. Back in the late 80s? No, 90s? I forget. There were still dirt roads and everyone had a septic system. There was no public service other than power to your house. That was it. This is raw. This is Jackass Flats. Okay, that's Prescott Valley back then. Their small yard, I took a fruit tree in every 8 feet. The semi-dwarfed tree, and I planted every 8 feet. And it's way too heavy, but I kept them down. I halfway espaliated them. Kept them on the fence line. I just kept them in this smaller yard, and I produced very, very heavily, lots and lots of fruit.
How close to the fence?
I went right to the fence.
Okay.
Some things to look at. This is a great example, going back to, I think, Terry's call. I've got peaches I got to harvest tonight or tomorrow, this weekend sometime, because it's loaded and it's perfect. The way I grow a peach in a container is I take the summer suckers off. If a tree, you want to keep it small, it's very easy to do. The way I do it, let me show you. I'm going to try my new, let's see if it's still powered up. It's not. Let's see if I can turn on. This is under pressure. It's never been used before. This is a new battery-operated pruner, but if not, I got my backup. Do I have my backup? Yeah, I do right here. Let's see if she'll go. There we go. Yeah. Here you go, folks, online. Is that cool or what? I got to prune all the trees. It was shaping or training the trees in the lines. By the time you get done pruning like 500 trees, you've got tennis elbow. It just really wears on you. So I'm thinking this is going to help. This is just in. But here what I look at is you're seeing this long growth, the summer growth. That's called, those are suckers. You can see it was originally from here. This is what the tree was. And then it's put on this much growth. This is a happy, happy tree. Well, I want you to plant it. I want to sell trees that will grow in a form, in a shape that's more uniform. So I go through, I personally kind of hand train the trees. And so here, if you're going to keep it in your own yard, keep it small, what I would do is I would take this off. I just go, let's see if it'll work. I love it, oh my gosh. I'm going to be happy today. I would just shape this, and I wouldn't let it grow so big. I would prune it back. This summer new growth, like it's now lopsided. I would prune this back here. Put this back. And just don't let it get too rangy. Keep it down. So in my container, my peach hides or gives me privacy by the hot tub. I needed something there, but it's by the patio. I wanted something that was bigger because my neighbor looks right down from her bedroom window, right down into the hot tub. And of course, you're in the hot tub, when she's going to bed, the lights are going on. It's not so good. I used a peach tree. Well, I want that to be proportionate to the pot that I have. Otherwise, it looks out of place. You keep it shaped. It grows like crazy, produces like crazy, and it provides me the privacy that I want. So you can easily do that on a fence line. On a fence line, they call that espalier. They actually keep it two-dimensional. They keep it sideways sometimes. Or you just keep it smaller head. So with this, I would actually prune off this. Gosh, I'm gonna like this. This is just so good. So I would just shape this broken branch right here. I would just take that off. There's an old fruit that just got damaged or something happened. I pick that off. What other shaping do I have? Just shape it. Don't be afraid. And then after I'm done, I'm going to fertilize everything so that if I made a mistake, it just grows its way right out of it. So this is a great time. Oh, here's a good example. You'll see a dead branch. Let's see if I can get that where you can see it. You see this dead branch right there? Never have dead wood on any of your plants. There are bugs roaming around the forest right now looking for that. And they're attracted to dead wood. So tip borer, usually they're boring kind of insects, and they'll get in there. They're there to to compost this. What happens is they forget, they keep on going down the branch, and they kill off the branch. So anytime you see dead wood, so I had a customer in, they just had a crepe myrtle. The top of the plant was dead because of winter burn. The top was looking good and in bloom. And his wife said, "Don't you touch my crepe myrtle." He said, "But that's not good." Of course, I'm the referee. And so I'm going, well, I don't know what to do with you two. I don't want to get in the middle of you, but if it were my crepe myrtle, I'd probably take all the dead stuff off because of borers can get in there and be attracted to the dead wood. So what'll happen, you guys can understand this, once you start, you got new equipment, you can't stop. It's so good. So that's looking better already and more shapely. And for a customer, this is a plant for sale. It'll now grow more. I'm going back to a branch. So here's what I'm looking at my professional eye. Now that I've already pruned it, I'm looking for crossing branches. I'm not sure about this one, so I'll take this off just because it was competing with this branch, and this is a more preferred shape, more preferred spacing. We call that anyway. Then I'm looking for things that are crossing back into the tree. So you see this branch right here is growing back into the canopy. I want to open that up. I don't want that growing there. There's a dead branch. This is growing towards that. I'll probably go back to like right there. I'm trying to get the scaffolding, is what that's called. I want the racking or the branching structure to be good for you when you're in like year 3 and this thing's loaded up with hundreds of pounds of fruit. It's got the scaffold and the branching so it can take all that weight and not break. There's a technique to shaping that. The lesson for you all is, if it's got a sucker like this is where the growth was last winter. We pruned it back last fall. Now this is all new growth. If you don't want it to grow any taller than this, simply cut it off. Or what I would do is take it back to this branch because I like the way this looks. I'll take it back to there. There's no right or wrong. It's just having branches grow into the inside clogs up so you get more of that curl, more shunnel, more disease potential. This keeps airflow going. That goes for apples, pears, cherries, whatever. Dead stuff like this, take it off. You see the new bud right here already forming. And then don't let it get too big. Like I don't want to go up a ladder anymore. And so I go up to a step ladder, but I don't want to go 6-8 foot ladders. It's just, I don't know, I like heights and I'm not afraid. That's not good when you're climbing up picking fruits. So my fruit picker plus maybe a step ladder, that's as high as I want to go. All my trees are at that level. Okay, in the back? Is there something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you do this for newly planted trees as well?
I just did it for this one. Yep, I would. The summer suckers, the secret to keeping plants down. They don't really tell you that much. They'll tell you winter pruning. We have whole classes on how to prune in the winter. But really the secret to keeping plants in containers or smaller next to a patio, next to fence lines, is the summer pruning. Usually you do that right after you pick the fruit, you trim it back to summers. Great question. Anything else? Yeah.
I'm fairly new to this, so I may be misremembering this, but I feel like it was when recommendations for pruning typically try not to take off more than about a third of the plant. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
That's usually in the winter. Now you're quoting all the winter stuff.
Okay, got it.
So in the winter, the formula is don't take more than a third of the foliage mass off of the plant.
Okay.
If you do more than that, that's with most trees. Grapes, you're doing way more than that.
Yeah.
Berries, you're doing way more than that. But usually, that's the case for trees. If you take more than that off, you're taking off too much foliage mass in the spring. You can't create enough photosynthesis, and so you get some damage. Depends how aggressive. You got that old house, and the 90-year-olds haven't, they just went into the home or whatever. They haven't been able to really. They were gardeners back through their 80s, and then they just couldn't get out there like they used to. We see this a lot. And you just need to really go after it because it has not been touched in 10 years. Go after it. And then deal with the consequences. You might have to take a chainsaw to it. Well, honestly, if the gardens are that overgrown, it probably needs to be thinned some. So if your plants are ugly, get rid of them. You gardeners, you've got to get over yourselves sometimes. We need to add, I try to add 10% new plants into my gardens every year. So I always have, so every 10 years, I'm just always remodeling, not remodeling, it's gardening, but I want some freshness in my gardens every year. Not just your flowers, but my trees. So we just took a tree out in the front landscape. The front landscape is 10 years old here at the garden center. They're starting to get too big. I want to feature trees. We know trees. I want a new one out there. It's time for that one to go, put something different to feature that, and then I'll leave that grow for 5 years, then I'll cut the other one down. I'm just always rotating the landscapes so they look fresh and young and vibrant. As plants are younger, they're prettier when they're younger, they bloom better when they're younger. Yeah?
I have long narrow beds on the outside edge of my lawn, right before the fence.
Yeah.
It's a short metal fence,
Sure.
and it's hotly cracked there.
Yes.
Everything hates it. I'd like to, on the ends, put up some lumber and either some kind of lumber or wire on the top and grow grapes over
Sure.
there. Do they care if they're sitting on lattice or wire?
So if I heard this correctly, just for the folks over here, and then we'll kind of go. She's got a hot area, some fencing, and she wants to put a wire or some sort of structure up and grow grapes. Would they take that kind of wind and sun? Grapes love the sun. They'll take the wind. And the more sun they get, the larger the fruits, the bigger the clusters. So absolutely. Also plants like berries and grapes, they have a way of shading themselves. So as it gets hot, they've got all this foliage and they're shading their root structure. So really they don't need any more real watering or more care when it's 100 out as it does when it's 80, because they've grown at that point and they're shading and protecting themselves. Also, plants have a way of rotating as the leaves get hot. They'll actually, in the morning, they're facing the sun. They're actually moving. And during the day, when it's hot, they'll actually turn so they don't get as much foliage. They're actively cooling themselves. Trees, shrubs, they're actually working that way. And so they have a way of cooling themselves. So I think they do just fine. The secret's going to be your water system and how are you going to amend the soils there? Because grapes like a richer soil. But if you do that, they should do really, really well.
We're sitting on DG.
Ah, there you go. Hard pan. Anyway, with that, I'll hang out and answer questions. I'll put my mask on. I'll be safe. We'll try to social distance. We love you all being here. Thanks for tuning in online. Before you go, though, online especially, I want you behind that computer screen. Go ahead and clap. There you go. Thank you. Thank you all.